You ever seen someone completely lose their mind over something that doesn't even belong to them? That's exactly what happened when the HOA president from the neighborhood down the road decided my private lake was hers to share, and I was apparently just the gatekeeper. I had just finished moving into my dream property, a 30-acre lakefront ranch I'd worked my whole life to afford. Quiet. Peaceful. Private. That last word, private, is important, because it seems some people don't understand what it means when something isn't open to the public. Especially Karen, the HOA president. Now, before I even knew her name, before I even had the chance to enjoy a full month on my property, she made it very clear that she thought her neighborhood's homeowners association gave her power far beyond its borders. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind just a bit. I bought this ranch after years of saving and planning. I'm not a billionaire. I just made smart choices, worked overtime, and skipped the vacations and luxuries until I could finally get the land I'd always wanted. When the listing for the lakefront ranch went live, I jumped on it. It was old, kind of wild, but beautiful. The lake was untouched. No signs, no gates, just open nature, and I loved it that way. I spent the first 2 weeks clearing debris, cleaning up the dock, planting trees, and building a quiet picnic area where my family and I could sit in peace. There was no HOA here. I made sure of that before I signed anything. I wanted freedom, freedom to enjoy my own land without someone telling me what shade of paint my fence should be or how tall my grass could grow. The neighboring gated community about a mile away was everything I wanted to avoid: perfectly trimmed lawns, identical houses, and a board of people who took themselves way too seriously. I didn't think much of them. Their neighborhood had its limits and mine was separate, legally and geographically. Or so I thought. About 3 weeks into living there, I pulled into my driveway after a supply run and noticed something strange down by the lake. There were cars, 4 of them, parked awkwardly along my gravel road. That was already a red flag. I didn't invite anyone over, and no one should have been here. I walked down toward the dock, and that's when I saw them. A full group of people. Adults, kids, music playing, lawn chairs unfolded, coolers open, even someone grilling hot dogs like it was a public park. I was frozen for a second, not with fear, but with disbelief. Then I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the dock like it was her kingdom. Short haircut, designer sunglasses, white capri pants, yep, the full Karen starter pack. She looked up at me like I was interrupting her day. I walked up, calmly but firmly, and said, "Excuse me, can someone tell me what's going on here?" She smiled and said, "Oh. You must be the new owner. I'm Karen, president of the HOA over at Silver Pines. This lake is just so beautiful, we've always brought guests here. I figured you wouldn't mind if we used it this weekend." I blinked. "You figured I wouldn't mind?" She nodded like she was doing me a favor. "It's kind of been an unwritten tradition. Ever since the last owner stopped coming around, we've made use of the lake. I assumed it was just community property." I shook my head. "This is not community property. This is private land. I just bought it, and no one has permission to be here." Her smile dropped. "Excuse me?" I repeated myself, keeping my tone even. "This is private property. I have the deeds, the boundaries are clearly marked. No one, not you, not anyone from Silver Pines, has any right to be here." A few of her guests started packing up, sensing the tension. But Karen? She didn't move. "You can't just lock the community out of this lake. That's not how it works. We've used it for years." "Well, times have changed," I replied. "This isn't a public lake, and if you've been trespassing all this time, that ends today." Her tone shifted immediately. The friendly act vanished. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," she snapped. "I'm the HOA president. I represent over 80 homes, and we have rules about shared access." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Your rules don't apply here. This land isn't part of your HOA. You have zero authority here." She glared at me like I'd just insulted royalty. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll be talking to the board, and maybe even the city." "You do that," I said, pointing toward her car. "In the meantime, I suggest you leave before I have to call someone myself." She finally gathered her things and left, mumbling under her breath. I thought that was the end of it. I went back to cleaning up after their mess, trash left behind, bottle caps in the grass, someone even dropped a sock in the water. But little did I know, that was just the beginning of a very bizarre battle over a lake that legally, officially, and without question, belonged to me. The next morning, I thought I'd wake up to peace and quiet, but instead, I was greeted with a knock at my front gate and the sight of a sheriff's cruiser parked on the gravel path. At first, I thought maybe it was just routine patrol or someone looking for directions. But then I saw her again, Karen, standing right beside the deputy like she had called in the cavalry to deal with some major emergency. Her arms were crossed, chin held high like she was about to win some long-fought war. I stepped out of the house slowly, unsure of what this was all about. The deputy walked up and said, "Morning, sir. We received a call about a disturbance and possible aggressive behavior on the premises yesterday." I blinked, stunned. "Aggressive behavior?" I repeated. "At my own home?" Karen jumped in before I could say another word. "Yes, officer, that's him. He threatened me and my guests, raised his voice, told us we weren't allowed near the lake. We've been enjoying that lake for years. It's practically a part of our community." The deputy looked back at me. "Mind if we have a quick chat?" I nodded, still in disbelief, and gestured for him to follow me toward the front porch. I handed him the property deed, the county survey, and, just for good measure, my phone with time-stamped security footage of the entire encounter. The video showed Karen and her group walking in without permission, setting up chairs, and then me arriving and calmly asking them to leave. Not a single moment showed me being aggressive or threatening. The deputy studied the documents carefully and then watched the video. He scratched the back of his neck and said, "Yeah, from what I can see, this is clearly your property. And you were well within your rights to ask them to leave." Karen, still standing near the driveway, must have sensed that things weren't going her way, because she stomped toward us and shouted, "That video doesn't show the whole story." He was intimidating. He made us feel unsafe. The deputy raised his hand and calmly asked her to stand back. "Ma'am, the evidence here doesn't support your claims. This land is privately owned. You do not have permission to be here. If anything, you and your guests were the ones trespassing." That did not sit well with Karen. Her face turned bright red. "So what, he gets to lock us out of a lake that's been shared for years? That's not how this works. This affects the whole neighborhood." I finally spoke up. "Look, I don't care what happened in the past. If the previous owner didn't enforce boundaries, that was their choice. But I own this land now, and I'm not going to tolerate strangers treating it like a community park." Karen snapped back, "You're not part of the community. You're just some outsider who thinks he can buy a lake and fence everyone out." "That's exactly what I did," I said, trying not to laugh. "Bought it. Own it. And now I'm protecting it." The deputy gave Karen one last warning. "Ma'am, unless you have legal documentation that gives you rights to this property, which, as of now, you've failed to produce, you need to leave. If this happens again, you could face charges." Karen muttered something under her breath, then turned around and stormed off. As she left, she yelled, "This isn't over." But in my mind, it absolutely should have been. I thanked the deputy for being professional, and once they both drove away, I stood there for a long time just shaking my head. It was one of the most ridiculous things I'd ever experienced. Who calls the cops on the owner of the land? I figured maybe that was the end of it. I hoped Karen had learned her lesson. But oh no, Karen wasn't done. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening. Flyers started appearing on my gate, badly written letters from the HOA, inviting local residents to sign a petition for community lake access. I ripped them down. Then one evening, as I was grilling on my deck, I noticed a drone hovering above the lake. I followed it with my eyes as it circled, then flew off back toward the direction of Silver Pines. Petty stuff, really. But it told me one thing: Karen wasn't backing down. I decided it was time to be proactive. I put up more private property signs, added a lock to the main entry trail, and contacted my lawyer to discuss what else I could legally do to protect my land. He advised me to document everything, and I did: photos, videos, written logs of every encounter. Then came the letter. It arrived in a fancy envelope, stamped with the Silver Pines HOA logo. Inside was a formal request from the HOA board asking me to grant shared recreational access to the lake for the benefit of the greater community. It was written in the most polite, fake professional tone you can imagine, but the message was clear: give us access, or else. I almost laughed reading it. They had zero legal claim, no easement, nothing. It was pure bluff. Still, I had my lawyer draft a professional cease and desist response, outlining the boundaries, ownership proof, and warning them against further trespassing. I mailed it and emailed it. Silence followed for a few days, and I let myself believe it was finally over. Until I caught two teenagers fishing at the lake. I approached them gently, and they quickly apologized, saying, "Sorry, ma'am said it was okay." "Ma'am?" I asked. "Karen," one of them replied. "She said it's fine as long as we're quiet." That was the last straw. Karen wasn't just trespassing anymore, she was actively encouraging others to do it. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I simply made one more call, to the sheriff's office, and another to my attorney. I filed an official police report and began the process of getting a no trespass order issued. Karen thought this was about power. She thought her role in a neighborhood HOA gave her some kind of royal authority. But all it did was dig her deeper into a battle she had no chance of winning. This wasn't her community's lake. This was my land. And I was done playing nice. About a week after I filed the official police report and sent the cease and desist letter through my attorney, I expected things to go quiet. Most people, when faced with legal paperwork and an official warning from law enforcement, would back off and move on. But not Karen. She seemed to take it as a personal challenge, like she was fighting some noble war on behalf of her precious neighborhood. I started noticing more signs of her attempts to provoke me. First, it was the subtle stuff: groups of people walking along the property line, stopping to stare, taking photos, pretending they were just enjoying a nature walk. Then came the noise: late-night drones buzzing over the water, random car horns outside my gate in the middle of the night. I didn't react. I documented everything, time-stamped it all, and kept feeding it to my attorney. We were building a case, and every petty stunt she pulled only made it stronger. But Karen wasn't satisfied with just harassment. She wanted access. Public, permanent, and on her terms. A few days later, I found a printed newsletter taped to my gate. It was from the Silver Pines HOA. The headline in bold letters read, "Lake Access Dispute, a Community Issue." Inside the newsletter were paragraphs filled with twisted facts, half-truths, and complete fabrications. They claimed the lake had historically served the neighborhood, that I was attempting to claim natural resources as personal property, and that my actions were harming community morale. I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me with emotional manipulation. She even included a line suggesting that the HOA was exploring legal avenues to reclaim public access rights. That was rich, considering the lake and land were completely outside their jurisdiction. It was like me trying to make rules for someone else's backyard just because I liked the view. I scanned the entire newsletter and forwarded it to my lawyer. His response? A formal warning sent directly to the HOA's legal counsel, clearly stating that any further defamatory statements or harassment would result in a civil lawsuit. But Karen still didn't let up. A week later, I came home from a quick trip to the hardware store and found something that pushed things over the edge. Someone had cut a section of my fence. It wasn't a random break, it was clean, deliberate, and clearly meant to create a pathway from the trail that led in from the back end of Silver Pines. I reported it immediately. The sheriff's deputy who came out was the same one from before. He sighed and said, "Honestly, I've never seen someone fight this hard to access a lake they don't own." We filed another report, this time including vandalism and suspected criminal trespass. I had already installed trail cams at several points on the property, and we reviewed the footage together. Sure enough, it showed two men, faces partially covered, coming from the Silver Pines trail and using bolt cutters to get through the fence. The deputy recognized one of them. "That guy's a resident," he said. "Seen him before. Guess who he's friends with?" No need to guess. We both knew. Karen. The next step was simple. My lawyer filed for a restraining order against the HOA board president, Karen, and submitted evidence for civil damages due to repeated harassment, trespass, property damage, and defamation. A court hearing was scheduled, and just like that, what started as an entitled request to borrow a lake turned into a full-on legal battle. The morning of the court hearing, I showed up with my lawyer, a binder full of evidence, and enough video footage to make a mini documentary. Karen showed up in heels and pearls like she was attending a brunch. Her lawyer looked about 10 years younger than mine and seemed to already regret taking the case. When the judge asked Karen's side to speak first, her lawyer tried to argue that the lake was a commonly used resource and that the community had a reasonable expectation to continue using it. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you have any legal documentation granting access to this lake?" The lawyer looked nervous and admitted, "No, Your Honor. It's more of a historical use argument." The judge turned to us. My lawyer stood, calmly laid out the deed, the county map, the HOA jurisdiction line, and every video, letter, and report we'd collected over the last few months. When the judge saw the video of Karen inviting teenagers to fish and the drone footage, she frowned. Then came the vandalism evidence. Karen tried to interrupt, but the judge warned her not to speak out of turn. After 30 minutes of review, the judge made her ruling. The restraining order was granted, meaning Karen couldn't step foot near my property again. The HOA was formally ordered to cease any and all attempts to claim access. They were also fined for the fence damage and told to issue a correction in their community newsletter. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, muttering something about appealing the decision. But we both knew she wouldn't. She had no case. No proof. Just a sense of entitlement that had finally crashed into a legal wall. I returned to my ranch with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I replaced the fence, added more trail cameras, and even installed a motion-activated light system by the lake. No one came back. Not Karen, not her guests, not even the kids. It was finally over. And the best part? The very next weekend, I took my family down to the dock, lit the grill, and enjoyed the lake in total silence. No yelling, no drone buzzing, no unauthorized guests. Just the sound of water, birds, and a calm breeze. That lake wasn't just water to me anymore. It had become a symbol. A reminder that standing your ground, no matter how ridiculous the fight gets, is worth it when the land is yours, the law is on your side, and your peace is priceless. Just when I thought the dust had finally settled and life would return to the quiet, peaceful rhythm I had envisioned when I first bought the lake ranch, I got one final surprise. About 2 weeks after the court hearing, a letter arrived in the mail. But this wasn't from Karen or the HOA, it was from the county records office. Curious and cautious, I opened it and read that a community petition had been submitted requesting a zoning review of my property. I didn't even need to ask who was behind it. Karen might have lost in court, but she wasn't going to walk away without one more attempt to twist things in her favor. I immediately contacted my lawyer, who looked into the filing and confirmed it had no legal weight. It was more of a public nuisance tactic than a serious zoning threat. The petition included signatures from about 30 people, most of whom were HOA residents and some names I recognized from Karen's little dock parties. They had claimed that I was blocking public access to shared natural resources, and that my fences and signs were harmful to community enjoyment. My lawyer laughed when he read it. "They're trying to disguise entitlement as activism," he said. "Don't worry, we'll shut this down before it even gets a hearing." And he did. The county officials reviewed the original property deed, confirmed that the land had never been zoned for public access, and dismissed the petition outright. Still, it made me realize something. Karen's obsession wasn't just about the lake, it was about control. And even when she couldn't win, she needed to feel like she was still fighting. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. Instead of just waiting for her next move, I decided to make one of my own. I went out and had new fencing installed, taller, stronger, reinforced steel posts. Along with that, I put in motion-triggered cameras with high-definition night vision. Then, I landscaped the entire border with thick, thorny shrubs, natural deterrents to anyone even thinking about sneaking in. To top it off, I had a new set of professional, private property, trespassers will be prosecuted, signs printed, complete with reflective lettering and a QR code that linked directly to a web page displaying my property boundaries, ownership proof, and the court order against the HOA. Anyone could scan it and see for themselves that this wasn't a public space. Word spread fast. The HOA newsletter, which had once featured dramatic headlines about me and the so-called lake access crisis, suddenly got quiet. The Silver Pines message board stopped mentioning my name. Karen disappeared from public events for a while. Apparently, her neighbors started turning on her too, after the lawsuit, the legal fees, and the embarrassment of losing so publicly. They didn't think her leadership was worth the trouble anymore. Rumor had it that she was voted out as HOA president just a month later. But the story didn't end there. One late afternoon, as I was walking the trail near the west edge of my property, I saw an older man standing just outside the fence line. He looked harmless, maybe in his 70s, holding a fishing rod but clearly hesitating. I walked over and asked if he needed help. He introduced himself as George, one of the original residents of Silver Pines, and said he used to come to the lake decades ago when it was still owned by an absentee rancher who never minded the occasional fisherman. Wasn't trying to cause trouble, he said. Just missed the old days. I respected that honesty. I explained everything that had happened, all the way from Karen's first uninvited picnic to the courtroom showdown. He shook his head and said, "Figures. Karen always did think she ran the county." Then he smiled. "You're doing the right thing. You worked hard, you bought the land, and you're protecting it. Don't let anyone make you feel bad about that." That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that this entire ordeal had been more than just a petty neighborhood fight. It was a lesson in boundaries, not just physical ones, but personal ones too. I'd learned how important it is to stand up for yourself, especially when people try to manipulate, guilt trip, or overpower you. It also taught me the value of patience. I could have lost my cool a dozen times. I could have yelled, fought back, or even gotten myself in trouble. But instead, I chose to document, respond legally, and remain in control. And in the end, that's what beat Karen, not rage, but reason. A few months later, I hosted a small gathering, just family and a few close friends. We had a barbecue by the lake, watched the sunset, and laughed about everything that had happened. The kids fished from the dock. My wife sat beside me in a lawn chair, smiling for the first time in a while. And as I looked across the water, I realized how different everything felt. This was no longer just a piece of land. It was peace, hard-earned and fully mine. I added one final feature to the lake dock, a simple wooden sign that read, "Private. Protected. Peaceful." And underneath in smaller letters, "Respect earns access. Entitlement earns fences." It wasn't meant to be snarky. It was just the truth. Since that day, not a single person has tried to enter without permission. No drones, no flyers, no uninvited guests. And as for Karen? I haven't seen or heard from her since the day she was removed as president. Some say she put her house up for sale not long after and moved to another town. Others say she still lives there but keeps her head down now, no longer the queen of anything. Either way, I don't think about her much anymore. I think about my lake. My home. And how sometimes, when the world tries to take what's yours, the best thing you can do is build a fence. Not out of spite, but out of strength. Because peace, once you've earned it, is something worth protecting. Always.